Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to Kelly, Lynn, Tiffany, Hannah, and David. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you today. I'd also like to thank those guests who have joined us in the audience who were able to speak to the media earlier this morning. You are very brave. Others who have stepped forward have been bullied and canceled and condemned, and I sure hope that does not happen here today. It is vital that we have the opportunity to listen to all voices and learn from a number of people throughout these discussions. Throughout the years, we have seen that Albertans can pull together, and we need to continue to do that now. Because those who make a decision to discount other people's lived experience and expertise, and those who make a decision to target the health or safety or livelihood of those who disagree, are also making a decision to create division and encourage hate. And that is not the Alberta way. That is not acceptable in our province. We're also joined by the Minister of Health, Adriana LaGrange, Minister of Education, Dimitrios Nicolaides, Minister of Tourism and Sport, Joseph Scow, and Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery, to talk about changes we're proposing to protect the health and well-being of Alberta's young people and the safety of women and girls in competitive sport. And this includes children and youth in our province who identify as transgender and who experience gender dysphoria. I know this is a sensitive issue that's deeply personal to so many, and I'd like to reiterate what I've said many times before. We are here to support and uplift every child who identifies as transgender and who experiences gender dysphoria, as well as their families who wants what's best for them. Childhood is a time of self-discovery, and we want children and youth to have the time to gain experience and explore all opportunities available to them as they grow into adulthood. We also need to be cautious when it comes to young people undergoing procedures when we don't fully know all the risks. Today, our government is introducing 3 pieces of legislation that will set up guardrails to protect the health and safety of Alberta youth. First, we're proposing changes that would protect the future choices of minors who identify as transgender or who are experiencing gender dysphoria. If passed, the Health Statutes Amendment Act would prohibit physicians from performing all sex reassignment surgeries on minors. It would also prohibit the prescribing of hormone therapies, including puberty blockers, to treat gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, except in accordance with the exceptions set out by the Minister of Health. The exceptions will include minors aged 16 and 17 who have the approval of parents, physicians, and psychologists. In addition, minors who have already been prescribed hormone therapies to treat gender dysphoria or gender incongruence will be able to continue with this process. And I just want to reiterate that these policies are designed and intended to help preserve the choices children have before they make serious decisions about their bodies, or the ability to have children of their own one day, or undergo potentially permanent procedures where the benefits and risks are not yet fully understood. Today, we're also tabling the Education Amendment Act, which proposes changes to the way gender identity, sexual orientation, and human sexuality are discussed and taught in Alberta schools. The amendments we're proposing would bring more transparency, clarity, and consistency to Alberta's classrooms, while also respecting parents' indisputable role as caregivers. If passed, any student 15 and under who wants teachers or other school staff to call them by a new gender-related name or pronoun would need their parents to be notified and would require their parents' consent. Students who are 16 or 17 years old may do so without parental consent, but their parents would still need to be notified. Additionally, parents would have to be notified each time subject matter in the classroom deals primarily and explicitly with gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. As part of these specific changes, parents would have to opt their children in to those lessons instead of opt out, the way it is right now. And finally, as it relates to the specific policies in the Education Amendment Act, if it is passed, the Minister of Education, his ministry, would need to review and approve all learning and teaching resources, as well as all third-party presenters on topics dealing primarily and explicitly with gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. The simple fact is that we have heard concerns about content, and we have seen some materials that have been shared at schools in Alberta or other jurisdictions that are not appropriate. We want to ensure the material that is being used to teach Alberta students is age appropriate. The final bill I'll talk about is the Fairness and Safety in Sports Act. It aims to ensure everyone can fairly and safely participate in the sports they love. Sport is an important part of many people's lives. For some, it is an outlet for extra energy or stress, and for some, it is almost a way of life, the path that they want to pursue in their future. This legislation will protect the ability of everyone to safely participate in sports. If passed, relevant organizations would need to establish policies regarding athlete eligibility. Regulations created under the Act would clarify specific requirements for these policies, including limiting women and girls' competitive sport divisions to female-born athletes. At the same time, in order to ensure that every Albertan can participate in the sport of their choice, we will support the formation of additional co-ed divisions. This legislation aligns with a report to the UN General Assembly from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, in which the Special Rapporteur calls for female categories in sport to be exclusively for biological female athletes, and for the creation of open categories in sport as part of a larger effort to maintain fairness while ensuring the ability of all to participate. All three pieces of legislation have been developed, drafted, and tabled with the express purpose of striking the right balance for the health, safety, and well-being of all children and youth in our province. We're also upholding the rights of parents to care for, teach, and protect their children. These amendments are about being fair and supporting children and youth now in the event that they later choose to make life-altering and potentially permanent decisions. As I've done every time I've spoken about these policies, I want to speak to the youth who are most affected. I and my entire government are here to support you and uplift you and your families. You are loved, and we are absolutely committed to ensuring that you receive the support you and your family may need. And finally, to every Albertan, especially adults, let's continue to work to depoliticize our discussions and focus on the well-being of those most affected by these policies. It's up to us to show that even if we disagree, we all care so deeply for all of our children and youth. Thank you. And now...
Thank you. It's Shailan Skalsky with CTV News Edmonton. A question for the Premier. In the tech briefing, the officials couldn't tell us how many trans athletes these legislative changes would affect. We also heard that a gender reassignment surgery was not already happening for minors, with top surgery being very rare. And one of the doctors you consulted with said we don't actually know how often puberty blockers or hormone therapy is actually being used for anyone under the age of 15 and under. It appears your own government and those you consulted with is not clear how many people this will impact and why it's needed. So why did you feel it was so important to come forward, enshrine these changes into law as one of the first pieces of legislation this fall session?
Well, I think we've watched from around the world as new information has come in, particularly I think the most comprehensive review of all the evidence in the CAS report in the UK. There are also other European countries that have identified that there needed to be some guardrails around the medical side of transitioning, and that's what we're doing. We're wanting to make sure that children do not prematurely make decisions that are going to impact their long-term health, impact their long-term ability to have kids, and be able to make those decisions as adults. So we've looked around the world, and we think that this is the appropriate method to go forward to make sure that everybody's rights are protected and everybody's choices are protected. I think it is the case, and we've all read stories of top surgery being done and on minors, and it's not going to happen anymore. Bottom surgery is not being done on minors, but we wanted to make it clear that neither are going to be eligible for minors. And when you begin, what we have seen with the CAS report is that as kids go into puberty blockers, that it's almost a 100% transition into cross-sex hormones and then onto full transition. So that very first step of going on puberty blockers is kind of the essential one that needs to be made with care and concern and with the full understanding of the consequences.
Just some clarity in my first question and then my follow-up. What evidence do we have that it's happening here? You cited examples in the UK and in Europe and other areas of the world, but I'm asking about the province of Alberta, in which this legislation will be taking effect. And then in terms of my follow-up, both the Alberta Bill of Rights and the Charter of Protection, the Charter protect things around gender expression and identity. So how confident are you that you're going to be able to get these changes through without the notwithstanding clause, or are you prepared to use it?
Well, look, I mean, if it's not happening at all, then there shouldn't be any controversy around putting the guardrails around it. If it is happening, then we're going to be able to protect those kids until they're older. I think that we do have, all we can do is look at the prescribing practices of doctors, and yes, Lupron is prescribed to those under the age of 18. Sometimes it is prescribed for the purpose of early onset puberty, and that's a legitimate use. But we do know it's being prescribed, and we don't know how many instances it's being described for that use or for gender transition. We do also know that there is a breast reduction done on those under the age of 18. Now, maybe that's being done because of comfort. Some women with who need that for comfort's sake, and that's an appropriate use. But then there are those who we understand are getting it for the purpose of gender transition, and we think those decisions should be delayed. So we can just look at the practices that are being done. So we know that those are both practices that are happening in Alberta, and we just want to make sure that it's very clear that those are adult decisions to be made by adults. As for expression and identity, I guess we'll see. I believe that we've created a balance here. That's what we were looking for, is what is reasonable. What is a reasonable amount of decision making to happen with young people? We have all kinds of restrictions on the ability of minors to make decisions. And we do that because we want to make sure that they are of full capacity to be able to make decisions that are going to be consequential to them. So that's if it comes to it and that's the argument that we need to make, that's the argument that we will make.
Hi, Graham Thompson from the Star. Premier, just to repeat the question again on this issue of you're going to prohibit health professionals from performing sex reassignment on minors. And as you've said, and I talked to the tech briefing this morning, there's nothing happening. I guess there's maybe top surgery, not bottom surgery, but how many top surgeries are being done in terms of sex reassignment?
We don't have the answer to that.
Well, see,
more than one.
Well,
because we have statistics.
According to the tech briefing this morning, it's rare. So if it's rare on top and you don't even know the number, and the bottom is not being done, then why did you feel necessary to bring in this amendment when it's not really going to?
Well, we're watching lawsuits happen all over the world.
All over the world. Is it happening in Alberta?
All over the world, lawsuits are happening of young people who have transitioned
Minors.
And received surgery. I think, yes.
Is it happening in Alberta?
But the point is, it is happening in the medical profession, and we want to make sure that it doesn't happen in Alberta. And if it's not happening, there's no controversy. And if it is happening, we're going to be making sure that our medical professionals know that this is a treatment that's available for adults only.
And my follow-up is timing. You've been asked about this all week regarding your announcements this week. Tomorrow is the AGM for your party. Saturday is a leadership review. Are you doing this now? Why do this today and not maybe next week or the week after? Are you doing this ahead of your AGM because your members have been insisting on things like this?
Well, Graham, you've been a member of the Alberta Press Gallery for a long time. You know that we got policy that was passed in November. When you're in November, you're passing policy that you worked on in the previous spring. When you're passing policy in the spring, you're working on policy related to the budget. And then you have an opportunity through the summer to do the consultation. We announced this in February in the middle of spring session. You have a period of time where you have to do the work with your department, draft the legislation, get it through Cabinet Policy Committee, get it through caucus, get it through Cabinet, develop it with Parliamentary Council, make sure that you're appropriately drafting it, and then it gets introduced. I think that's the reason for the timing.
But then why not do it next week? Why today ahead of your convention?
We've got a 4-week session, Graham. I mean, we have a constituency. We have 2 weeks, and then a constituency break, and then another 2 weeks. So we have 13 pieces of legislation that we need to get through, and we need them introduced so that we can start debating them.
Thanks, Premier. We're going to move on to the next question. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa Johnson with the Canadian Press. I want to go back to the charter proofing question that was asked previously, and you mentioned that we have reasonable restrictions on minors in other ways, but just looking at Saskatchewan's experience with a very similar pronoun law, obviously there was a challenge and they had to use the notwithstanding clause. And you talk about you're confident that this legislation is balanced and don't anticipate having to use the notwithstanding clause, but when we were talking with government officials this morning, trying to dig down on what is the difference between Alberta's pronoun law compared to Saskatchewan, right? What makes it unique? They pointed to targeted mental health supports for trans youth, but I'm looking at the Saskatchewan law and there's a clause that looks absolutely the same as what the Alberta government is talking about here. If there's a reasonable expectation that parental consent is going to result in physical, mental, or emotional harm to a student. Principals shall direct them to appropriate professionals who are employed or retained by the school. So what is the difference between the Saskatchewan bill and the Alberta bill that you're introducing today that makes it unique and charter-proof?
Well, look, I mean, one of the things that I would observe is that those who have transitioned, they don't want anyone to use their dead name, and they don't want to be mispronounced. And so it seems incongruous to me, if we're supporting the mental health of a child, that they would be one name and one gender at school and then be misgendered and misnamed at home. I can't imagine what kind of impact that would have on a child mentally to have to do that. And so we are of the view that if there is an official name change where everyone in the school community knows that that individual is going by a new name, new pronouns, using the washrooms, using the locker room, you can't have everyone in the world know that except the parents. We believe that you have to have consistency, and if you are going to support the mental health of a child, they have to be supported, and that's why you cannot have parents and families out of the mix. Parents need to know what's going on with their kids.
You're talking about your justification for the legislation, but I'm asking you to explain how it's charter-proof.
I'm explaining the justification that we'll put forward, and the charter allows for limits on rights that are reasonable in a free and democratic society. We think what we're putting forward is reasonable.
And my follow-up question is in regards to the new sports rules that are coming forward. We didn't really get a lot of specific details in terms of how the new rules will be enforced. So there's a lot of questions about that, but some government officials, again, pointed to those sporting organizations relying on birth certificates. But in Alberta, you can change the sex and gender markers on your birth certificates currently. So is your government considering taking away the ability to change those sex and gender markers, or is the sporting rules not going to touch birth certificates? How are the sporting rules going to be enforced?
Do you have more you want to say on that, Scal?
Not birth certificates.
Come on.
Well, thank you for the question. I think the answer is pretty short. It's not necessarily birth certificate, but registration of sex at birth.
Great, thanks. Emmanuel?
Hi, Emmanuel Perez-Lovett, Radio Canada. So, Premier, your government is prohibiting hormone therapy and is prohibiting doctors from prescribing hormone therapy or puberty blockers to minors. But isn't that a direct attack on their medical independence? What if they really think that it's for the best of their well-being of their patients for them to prescribe that type of drug?
Look, doctors were given a lot of latitude to prescribe opioids, and now we have a fentanyl crisis as a result of inappropriate prescribing, and we've had to put guardrails around who can prescribe opioids, how they can be delivered, and I would say doctors aren't always right. This has supreme consequences on young people, on their ability to, if you're medicalized for life, it has consequences. If you are medicalized too early, it has consequences on fertility. And we believe that sometimes you have to step in and make sure that you're preserving choice and protecting the rights of kids so that they can make those decisions as adults.
Great. And on sports, how will sports organization really verify who can compete or not in women's categories? Because my understanding is you're kind of passing the buck down to them. So doesn't that open the door to some inequity between different sports?
Well, I think the minister said that it's you have to demonstrate the registration at birth. That would be the way it would be done. And sports has all kinds of testing that they do because they want to make sure that there's fairness. So I think that what we have heard is that the sports entities, competitive sport entities, want the ability to create biological female and women-only divisions, and we're being permissive. But we also want to create open categories so that all athletes can compete.
Great, thanks. Jonathan, go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. You spoke about an exemption being granted for the restrictions on gender transitions in minors for those who have begun hormones and puberty blockers. Why did you feel compelled to grant that exemption?
Well, if somebody is already well in the process, then we're not going to retroactively change their circumstance. But it's for any new individual. We want to make sure that the protections are in place, that they're old enough to be able to make the decision and understand the consequences, and that there's a multi-professional team, includes their parents, doctors, and psychologists that are able to assist them in making that decision. And we believe the age to have that level of maturity begins somewhere around age 16, 17, which is why we're making that exception.
Okay, my follow-up pertains to the name and pronoun changes in schools. So certain teachers on social media have said they're going to refuse to comply with the policy once you bring it in. There was even a teacher who called into your radio show saying that he wasn't going to comply with that policy. What will you do to ensure all teachers comply with the name and pronoun change policy?
Well, look, I mean, if you have the entire school community who knows a child's new name and gender, eventually the parents are going to find out. You have, I can't even imagine how that would work. So for school report cards, for school assemblies, for athletic appearances, for plays, everyone is going to, have some great pretense when the parents show up to participate in that? I mean, I'm not even sure what they're talking about. If a child is out with a different name and different gender in school, you can't have a situation where the only people who can't know are the parents. That interferes with the family relationship. It interferes with the parental bond with parents, and it's entirely inappropriate. We believe in parental rights.
Will there be any form of disciplinary action taken against teachers who refuse to comply?
We have a discipline process. I mean, remember, the Alberta Teachers Association, a number of years ago, we made the decision that for discipline actions, we had to create a new commission. And so if it does come down to it, that the teachers are defying this direction, then there will be a disciplinary process available.
Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, Catherine Gurkowski, Alberta Today. I'm again back to the parental rights. There are a wide range of conditions and treatments in childhood that have lifelong impacts that can affect fertility. I'm wondering why for this specifically you want to remove that parental right to make that decision with the doctor and the parent and the child.
Well, look, we've had a couple of recent instances where an individual has been sterilized without their knowledge, consent, or understanding by someone else, and then we've had to pay compensation for it. When governments in the past made the decision to sterilize individuals determined to be mentally feeble, that ultimately resulted in a massive lawsuit and compensation. Right now, there were hearings in the Senate of Indigenous women who want criminal code sanction for doctors who made the decision to sterilize them. I'm watching with great interest how that proceeds. So 20 years from now, if we were to have children sterilized, they will come back and say, who's responsible? And we just do not believe that this is something that's appropriate. A person has the right to determine their own fertility. Another person cannot decide that on their behalf. And we have to be able to protect the right of kids to be able to make those choices when they're adults.
And on the opt-in provisions, there's already the right for parents to remove their child from class if they don't want to be taught that. But a lot of educators are saying this is going to add a hurdle. They might not even bring in plans. So why, when 1 in 3 Albertans are sexually abused under the age of 18 and STI rates are skyrocketing, why put barriers in place to receiving education on sexuality?
Well, look, I mean, I think the problem has become that all of these things are intermingled, and it may well be that parents would opt into one type of sex education and not another, and that's their right. Under the School Act, we have a specific policy that parents have the right to choose what their children are exposed to, and we're just adding this additional provision. I would say it's no more complicated than getting parental buy-in on a field trip, which happens a lot, that you have to send home and get consent forms for a field trip. So I don't think it's going to be any additional work. They have processes in place to be able to get the opt-in on each of these instances for structured education, and I think parents need to know, especially because I think parents want to be able to talk to their kids, and when they do opt in, want to be able to talk to their kids about it afterwards. That shouldn't be something that's a surprise to parents. Parents should be fully informed on all instances, and that's what we've heard from parents that they want, and that's what we'll deliver on.
Thanks, Premier. We're going to take a break and go to the phones. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
First question is from Matthew Black from the Edmonton Journal. Please go ahead.
Oh, good morning. We asked in the tech briefing about how many athletes the sports policies might affect, but they weren't able to say, and I don't know if you or the minister has that figure, but I'm just curious how you make policy when you don't know how many people it affects.
Do you want to go? I'm happy to answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that question, Matthew, and it's a very good one. We don't keep track of those specific numbers, but what I can tell you is it affects athletes like Hannah standing right behind me. And there's potential to affect so many other athletes around the province of Alberta. And so we're taking steps to ensure that there is fairness and safety and, of course, inclusion in sport and protecting women and girls as they play.
All right. You mentioned safety there, but I mean, physical disparities happen in all sports at all levels, particularly at the youth level. I'm looking right now at a high school football roster. There's a 285-plus pound lineman going up with a running back who's half that weight. How's the safety risk there any different from the risks you're citing in introducing these bills?
Well, look, why do we have women's categories at all? Like, why did they even develop? If there's no difference between men and women, why haven't we always just had co-ed sports? I mean, I think because what we realized is that at a certain age, somewhere around age 12, as puberty takes hold, you end up with a difference in ability, capability, strength, speed, agility, hand-eye coordination, and that is part of the reason why we developed women and girls sports in the first place. The other thing I'd say, it's vitally important to have sports in a background. The vast majority, I think it's somewhere in the order of 90% of the women who are in executive positions have an experience in team sports. I played volleyball, I played basketball, and I don't want kids getting demoralized because they feel like it's stacked against them and it's unfair. I think if we're going to support equality and we're going to support pathways for women and girls to achieve their highest level possible, not only in sport but in life, we have to make sure that we understand that there are differences and protect that.
Operator, next caller, please.
Next caller is Mike Campbell from the Counter Signal. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. Have you consulted with any detransitioned men or women as young adults who highly regret being given hormone blockers when they were young and confused? And if so, can you speak to how that impacted your decision?
Kelly, do you want to comment on that?
Through Detrans Alliance Canada, I've had several young detransitioners reach out to me. What has impacted them the most was when they began to talk about desistance. They were told they were simply struggling with internalized transphobia. And the one young girl went ahead and had a bilateral mastectomy at 17. And after that, she realized that it did not address her mental health issues. And when she insisted with her doctor that transitioning had not helped her, her doctor refused to see her again. Her counselor terminated therapy, and the LGBT two-spirit support group she had been in banned her as hateful and harmful. And I think that's unacceptable. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Is there a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the educational-related proposed changes, do you think that this will ensure that gender ideology isn't taught to young children, or will teachers still be able to teach it in their own ways? For example, there are hundreds of pictures online of grade 1, 2 classrooms having posters on the classroom wall that have student names and the pronouns under it.
Well, look, I mean, if there is going to be formalized instruction about sexual orientation, gender identity, a gender ideology, and a sexuality, parents are going to have to be able to opt in to that formal instruction. It is not meant to impact incidental reference to any of those topics in a classroom. It's the formal instruction, and so I would put it to parents that if they're satisfied with the materials being presented in the classes, they'll opt in. If they aren't, they'll opt out.
Thanks, Primer. We have time for 2 more questions. Operator, next caller, please.
Next question is from Mark Villani from CTV Calgary. Please go ahead.
Mark, you there? Mark, one more time. Okay, operator, can we move to the next person? We can come back to Mark, maybe.
The next question is from Lauren Heights from 660 News Radio. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question. You and various people in support of this policy have repeatedly said that you want to depoliticize this conversation and that creating this legislation will help you do that. Is that not, in fact, the opposite of the opposite solution to the problem? I mean, creating policy does inherently not depoliticize an issue.
Well, look, part of the practice of government is when you identify something that's a problem, you have to put a legislative framework in place to address it. And we have identified that there are some problems. And so this is what we're trying to do. We're putting guardrails around when these decisions can be made for children who have the maturity to understand the consequences. We're making sure that parents are included in the decisions that affect their kids. And we're making sure that biological women and girls have the ability to compete in sport. Those are areas that we identified where there were problems, and we're going to create some solutions.
Lauren, do you have a follow-up?
Sure. In terms of consultation, I know that you and your government have spoken to various people from the LGBTQ community in reference to this. Can you speak to people or organizations who perhaps are in opposition to your legislation that you consulted with? Did you get a well-rounded view of this issue and the people that it affects before you introduced these policies?
Yeah, we did do a roundtable. And the individuals at the table who shared our concerns were bullied and condemned and canceled. And so we realized that not every voice is going to be constructive in this conversation. So we reached out to every constructive voice that we wanted to, who we felt would come to the table in a respectful way and be respectful of the people who were around the table as well. And I sure hope that the brave people behind me don't end up with the same kind of bullying when they leave here today.
Great. Operator, can you please put through the last caller?
The last question is from Paula Tran from Livewire Calgary. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This morning at the technical briefing, it was confirmed that these pieces of legislation will apply to two-spirit youth as well. So I was wondering if you and your government has consulted with Indigenous individuals or organizations.
Well, what I would say is that our legislation only applies to the schools that are off reserve schools. First Nations or separate nations, they have their ability to create their own policies. And this will apply to anyone who is in a school that we do have the mandate to govern. I personally think that all parents want to know what's going on with their kids, regardless of whether they come from Indigenous households or non-Indigenous households. So I would expect that would be something that would be an expectation on the part of First Nations parents. And I believe that it doesn't change the decision. If you have a level of maturity that you want to get to before you start medically transitioning, it doesn't matter what your race is.
Premier, respectfully, you didn't answer my question. So were Indigenous organizations and individuals consulted before deciding that these policies will include two-spirit youth?
Well, as I said, it doesn't have an impact on First Nations. We don't govern First Nations, so they'll be able to make their own decisions.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That concludes our press conference for the day.
Thanks, everyone.